So patch 10.1 is finally here. With it brings a new zone, a new raid, and much more. To round out the series I've been making on the new transmog sets, today we're going to be going over every new weapon, offhand, and shield that's been added in patch 10.1. We're starting off strong here with my favorites, which would be the two-handed swords. We have a couple of questing swords. I'm just going to go through all the colors really quickly, by the way. I won't stop to explain each one. And after the questing swords, of which I think there's 3 different styles, we're going to be going on into one of my favorites, which is Ashkonder, Fall of the Brotherhood, which is very similar to Ashkandi from Vanilla WoW. This is one of my favorite swords in the game, probably of all time, and especially added in Dragonflight because it just matches with the theme so well. There are 4 colors of it, one for each of the raid tier difficulties, as you can see here. After the two-handed swords, we have the warglaives, which are exclusive to demon hunters. There's actually quite a few of these as well. We're going to see probably 6 color variations of this one, which include the 4 raid difficulties as well as the 2 PvP rankings. After that, we're going to see the color schemes for the questing and world drop new warglaives. Afterwards is the daggers. It's going to be kind of the same story for each one of these, where it's going to be mostly what's happening inside the raids and then also the questing. So for anything that is raid specific, there's going to be 4 colors, anything that's PvP will have 2, and anything that's world questing will have 3 to 4 depending. Some weapons, such as daggers for example, actually have multiple different models that drop from the raid, so instead of just having one raid and then one questing model, we're actually going to see multiple raid models, and each of them are also going to have 4 colors. As you can see here, these are the world drop and questing daggers. We'll quickly move on to the fist weapons, of which there's not many to show. Once again, starting with things that are in the raid. I actually don't believe there are any questing models for fist weapons. We're moving on to one-handed axes, where once again it's going to be the same story. We're going to see 6 different color schemes for these axes because there's 4 raid difficulties, the 2 PvP difficulties. The one-handed axe is also a weapon where there are multiple different raid models, so Aberrus will drop 2 different one-handed axes from different bosses, so you have a lot of options. The one-handed axe is actually the first example of this, but there's a few times in the video where we're going to see some very unique models that are either coming from very specific world drops or from professions rather than through the questing or from the raid. Now we're moving on to one-handed maces, and I'm getting tired of saying the same old story, and I don't want to say it another 10 times. Most of these are going to be raid or PvP specific based on their colors. Usually the color schemes are matching up, where the purple ones are the mythic ones, and so on and so forth. Once again, we have multiple different models of one-handed maces within Aberrus, so a lot of options here too. You can also look any of these up for yourself by looking right here on the right-hand side, where it actually shows the name of the current mace that I'm viewing, or any weapon for that matter. As you can see, there are plenty of one-handed maces to choose from, and it just keeps going. So that brings us on to the one-handed swords. There are going to be a few new ones that are specific to questing. There's obviously going to be one specific to the raids, and the one-handed sword is one of the ones where a world drop that comes from a treasure is actually featured as one of the new transmog options. The Molten Primal Fang is the one that I'm speaking of, and I can make a video on that later if you guys want about how exactly to get this, because I have this model in game now after the first day. Now moving on to the bows, there's going to be quite a few new bows added to the expansion. I also do want to point out as we get to this part, if there are any weapon types you don't see, it's not because I've forgotten them, it's because they simply didn't add any new models of those weapon types. Some notable ones would be two-handed axes and two-handed maces. Also, crossbows didn't get new weapon models. Now we're moving on to the guns, which is going to end the ranged weapons. As I mentioned before, there are no new crossbow models. So we saw bows before, now we're seeing the guns in all the different colors, and that's going to be it for the ranged weapons. So hunters, hope you enjoy bows and guns. Now we're moving on to my second favorite weapon of this new patch, which would be Jarun, Pillar of the Elder Flame, which are these really cool pole arms that come in a whole bunch of different colors. Now because the textures are so dark, it's actually hard to see some of the color differences of this pole arm, but it's one of my favorite models so far. We also have, as usual, the PvP models and the questing models to go along with the pole arms. Sticking with the long pointy weapons, I guess we're moving on to staves. A lot of the staff models actually in this patch look very similar with these orbs in the middle, as you'll see in this one. As you'll see later, the questing and world drop gear for staffs actually looks very similar to that first raid set that you saw. This staff has also been very popular, Erithos the Empty Promise, and goes well with the priest set. Here we can see the questing and world drop set as I mentioned, and how it's very similar to the first set I saw. It also looks like a polearm if you turn it around with that little stabby thing on the back. Now we're finally moving on away from weapons into shields and offhands. Starting with shields, there's a couple new shield models, and some of them I really enjoy, this being one of them. The next one I also enjoy because it reminds me of a really old shield as well. I'll put a little image and name of the shield so you can see what I mean. With Ashkandi and now this shield as well, they're really throwing us back to vanilla Blackwing Lair type gear. And finally, we're ending with the questing and world set shields, which I think also look great and match well with the questing transmog. These are our held in offhands, which is just a weird name for a weapon type. There's a surprisingly high amount of new held in offhand weapon models. It's a little disappointing for me, being a Fury Warrior, that I didn't get a lot of two-handed axe or two-handed mace models, in fact none, but there's a bunch of held in offhand models this patch. As you can see, it seems to just keep going with little doodads that you can hold in your offhand. And finally, after much ado, brings us to wands, in which there's barely anything to say. There's just a few models, and I think most of them are actually the questing models. I don't think there's any raid gear that is in the wand slot. There is this one though, the Sporekeeper's Baton, which is a new one. I think it's profession-based from enchanting. So that concludes all 14 weapon, offhand, and shield armor types or weapon types. all their transmogs and what they look like. Feel free to pause the video at any point you want, go back, look at the colors. Tell me in the comments what you think is your favorite one. I'm particularly fond of Ash Condor. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and take care.